right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. This class is about other religious books. You know, we talk about the Bible, and other religions have their Bible too. They have other scriptures that they look at for their convictions and doctrine, and we're going to look at several of them today. One of them is the Qur'an, sometimes spelled K-O-R-A-N, sometimes without the apostrophe, but we're going to look at that, the faith of Muslims. The Book of Mormon, Mormon or the Latter-day Saints, we'll look at that. Buddhism, they have their scriptures. It's called the Tripitaka, and Hindus have their scriptures as well. And then we'll also look at Christian Science. So hopefully we can get through a lot of this today. It's interesting stuff. I learned a lot putting this together. Let's first look at Muhammad and Islam. Muhammad was a prophet. He was a proclaimed messenger of God, and Muhammad claimed he received his revelations from the angel Gabriel, which is mentioned in the Bible, and he used that same angel. His purpose was to confirm previous scriptures. With Muhammad, there's a portrait of what supposedly he looked like. He lived about 600 AD, so I give you a time frame. But in his life, he didn't do any miracles, no verifiable healings. And as I mentioned, his purpose was to confirm previous scriptures. And you're going to see that as we get into it. It's very much tied to similar stories in the Old Testament. Like Christianity and Judaism, Islam is a one-God, monotheistic religion, but it's what they call a Neoplatonic idea of God. That's instead of a personal God where you have a relationship, it's a distant God, and he's not somebody that you can get really close to. So from the Muslim perspective and their view of their scriptures as provided by Gabriel to Muhammad, they have an accusation against the Jews, and they feel that the Jews have corrupted the scriptures. They use a lot of the same Old Testament stories, and they think the Jews have corrupted them. Their accusation against Christians, which would be us, is that we're worshiping Jesus as the Son of God, but God commanded them to worship only him. So they see that as contradiction. If you're going to worship God, that means you don't worship his Son, you worship God. So that's their accusation against Christians. And what they view, Abraham is also their father of the faith, which is a lot different than the way we view it. They must return to the true religion preached by Abraham. And you'll see that as we talk about it a little bit more. Islam has 5 pillars of their faith. The first one is a testimony of their faith. It's the oneness of God. Muhammad's a prophet. That's their testimony. They also have daily prayers. They're required to perform prayers 5 times a day. You know, the Jewish community used to do it 3 times a day, sometimes, or twice a day. They do it 5 times a day at specific times, and there's a particular ritual. There are special rooms in airports where they can go and do this. And so that's part of their 5 pillars. The third one is zakat, which is they're obliged to give a portion of their income beyond their own needs to the poor, which is typically 2.5%. They give it directly to the poor. And that's part of their 5 pillars of their faith besides their testimony and prayer. They fast regularly. During the month of Ramadan, the 9th month on their calendar, they fast from sunrise to sunset, taking neither food nor drink during that time for the whole day. After sunset, they eat. But for that whole day, they fast. For the entire month, they do that every day. They fast from sunrise to sunset. I mean, some of these pillars put us to shame, right? You look at some of their stuff, and it's like, wow, that kind of a commitment. The third one is this Mecca Pilgrimage. Mecca is their center of their religion, and if they are physically and financially able, they recommend that every Muslim make this pilgrimage at least once during their life. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this pilgrimage is. But it's preferably during the 6 weeks following this month of Ramadan. So typically it falls at the end of August. And there's a 5-day period where they make this trek. And you can see they're all dressed in white. And that's part of that particular pilgrimage. Let's look at this sacred mosque in Mecca. Here's what it looks like. And this picture is taken during this pilgrimage. So you can see hordes of people there. And the building in the middle is the key building. That's the Kaaba. This is Islam's holiest building. Here's how they view this building. It was built by Abraham and Ishmael. You know, when Abraham sent Ishmael off with Haggai out into the desert, if you read the scriptures, well, they believe Abraham visited them many times in the desert. And then during one of these visits, Abraham and Ishmael built this building, the Kaaba. It was the first house that was built for humanity to worship Allah. There's a cornerstone in the Kaaba. You know, in Christianity, Jesus is the cornerstone. Well, for them, it's called the Black Stone, and it was given to Abraham by the angel Gabriel, who's the one who showed Muhammad all this revelation. And Muhammad actually placed it, because this Kaaba had been rebuilt several times due to just wear and tear from the elements. So when Muhammad was alive, supposedly he put it in the right place. Now inside the Kaaba, there's an area called the Station of Abraham, and it's a glass and metal enclosure with what is said to be the imprint of Abraham's foot. And supposedly Abraham stood there on that stone during the construction, raising Ishmael on his shoulders to build the upper parts. There's also nearby, there's a special water well called the Zamzam, and that was brought to God by Haggai and Ishmael. When Haggai and Ishmael were sent out to the desert and they were going to die of thirst, and Haggai prayed, and there was a special spring that God provided. That's this well. And they view it that way. It's a very special well. So 5 times as they pray every day, 1 billion Muslims turn and face in the direction of the Kaaba. Kind of like the way Daniel did Jerusalem in the book of Daniel. And then once each year, when they do this special pilgrimage, it's called the Hajj. 2 million Muslims take this pilgrimage every year. And they go to the Kaaba where they can touch the black stone. So all of this is an integral part of their belief. And it's not that the stone has power. They just touch it because Muhammad touched it. That's the only reason. And so it's really special to them. It sounds like it, or at least be able to. I don't know if the black stone is accessible from the outside or the inside, but yeah, they take care of that. This 5-day ritual, I'll give you a little bit of detail about that. They come to this city and they declare, I want to do this. But there's 5 entry points, almost like little cities around Mecca. You have to go to one of those cities. You get your specific white clothes on, and you purify yourself in these cities. Then you come to the mosque and the Kaaba, and you say, I'm going to do this pilgrimage. And then you actually leave the city, and you go on like a 5-day journey out into the desert. And there's 2 cities you stop in. One city you pray and spend the night. There's another city you collect stones, because they have a stoning ceremony where they stone the devil, and they throw these stones at something. I'm not totally clear on all that. But then they come back and they do more prayers. They circle the Kaaba 7 times, and they get to drink from the Zamzam well. So it's very traditional, very rooted in their view of the Old Testament. So that's a little bit, give you a little bit of history on that. I'm sorry? The actual word? I don't know what it means, but I think it's something to do with Abraham and worshiping God. But that's a good question. What does that word mean? I don't know. It could be a good thing to look up. Yeah. I don't know. What is Kabbalah? It might be. It might be. I don't know. That's a good question. Kabbalah. I haven't looked that up. Yeah, Patty? What was the question? Oh, that's in, gosh, that's a good question. I think it's, yeah, I think it's Saudi Arabia. Now, when we think of Muslims, sometimes we think of, the terrorist side of that religion, and you hear the word jihad, and that stirs up fighting. Where here's a quote from Muhammad himself. The greatest jihad is to battle your own soul, to fight the evil within yourself. And so a lot of his teachings are, they're good principles. The Arabic word jihad is often translated holy war, but what it really means is a struggle or a striving for moral perfection. So in a religious sense, it is described by the Qur'an and the teachings of Muhammad, but jihad has many meanings. It can refer to internal as well as external efforts to be a good Muslim, as well as working to inform people, evangelize, to inform people of the Islam faith. Military jihad is required to protect the faith against others. But it doesn't mean you pick up a gun. It can mean legal negotiation, diplomatic, economic, political means. If there's no peaceful alternative, Islam also allows the use of force. But there's strict rules of engagement in pure Islam, like innocents such as women and children, they're never to be harmed. That's what Islam really teaches. Any peaceful overtures from the enemy, like the enemy in their mind would come forward and negotiate, you have to accept, what they bring to the table. So military action is therefore only one means of jihad, and it's very, very rare. And here's a way to look at it. There's Fundamentalist Islamic, which is kind of the conservative wing of Islam. It's just like the conservative wing of Christianity. We have a conservative side of Christianity. So most Middle Eastern terrorists are probably fundamentalist Muslims, but they are an extreme radical wing of that conservative part of Islam. I don't have a source for it. I was just pulled off the internet. I was just looking for the definition. In the Quran? Yeah, I don't know if it is. It might be, or it might be something else. Let's look particularly at the Quran with the scriptures. They do have manuscripts. Originally, it was written on palm leaves and stones and anything that was available at that time. So they established their canon, about 650 AD, which actually, I think I had an error in one of the slides. Muhammad lived around 600 BC. So a lot of these teachings came down both orally and written on stones and stuff. So they had professional remembrancers, which I would like to have as I get older. I like to have somebody help me remember stuff. That's what they did. So they finally said, okay, here's the real deal, around 650 AD, and they're called surahs. There's 114 chapters in surahs, but they're not arranged chronologically, like Genesis to Revelation. They're arranged longest first. So the first book of their scriptures is the longest, and the last book is the shortest. They have Kabira. These are big sins, is what they see. This would include murder, adultery, drunkenness, disobeying parents, neglecting your prayers, gambling, dancing, shaving your beard. It's a big sin. Forgetting the Quran after you read it. You're supposed to read the Bible and remember it. Well, they read the Quran and forget what it teaches. That's a big sin. You can receive forgiveness from these big sins with repentance. So they teach that. They also have smaller sins, sagira. This would include deceit, anger. They view that as a little sin. Lust. Forgiveness is available if greater sins are avoided, but you can also do good deeds, and you can get these sins removed. So it's a little bit of kind of earning your salvation. They do teach that in the Quran. Also, shirk, that's if you worship anybody but Allah, you've committed this sin, and there is no forgiveness for this. So Christianity worshiping Jesus, that's a big sin to them, and it's unforgivable because you're supposed to worship Allah. So that gives you a little bit of a piece of that. But where are the differences? If you compared their scriptures to the Bible, and I just picked out a few of them just to give you a flavor for some of the differences. When Abraham sacrifices his son, it's not Isaac, it's Ishmael. When he attempts to sacrifice him. And there's the reference, Surah 37, verse 102. All right? Yeah. Well, in our Bible, it's Isaac. In their Bible, it's Ishmael. It's very similar. I mean, you could read it. You could get a English Quran and you could read it and take a look at it. There's two trees in Eden. They have the story of the Garden of Eden. It's like the Bible, but there's two trees instead of one. Noah had a fourth son, but he drowned in the flood. Well, that's a difference they have. When Jesus was born and Zechariah was silent, that story's in there too. He was silent for 3 days instead of 9 months. So it's interesting how, and we think we know who the force behind creating this Quran was to deceive, how similar he makes the stories. Jesus had childhood miracles. You know, we talked about that in another class on some of the books that didn't make it into the New Testament. Talked about Jesus' childhood miracles. Well, the Qur'an does too. The sun and the stars orbit the earth instead of the other way around. But if you think about when the Qur'an was written, or when Muhammad got these revelations, 600 BC, that's Greek culture. Greek culture dominated during that time, and that was how the Greeks viewed the world. So it's in line with the worldview of the day, that everything revolved around the earth. You can earn your salvation and earn favor with Allah, receive forgiveness by doing good things. That's taught in the Bible, or in the Quran. Those are some of the differences. There's Surah 12 talks about there's 11 planets in our solar system. Sure, another quote from Surah 11: "Surely good deeds take away evil deeds." And another one I thought was interesting: Pharaoh's magicians repent in Surah chapter 20. So they have that whole story about Egypt and Pharaoh and all of that. So that just gives you a little bit about Islam. There's a whole lot more we could get into. I'm just giving you a cursory view of the religion as well as their books. Let's move on to Mormon, the Book of Mormon, Mormonism. Joseph Smith is the guy who's behind that. He's the guy who started that religion. And he too, just like Muhammad, he was visited by an angel. So he claims. It wasn't Gabriel, it was Moroni. And Moroni told him, "You will be given golden plates on the hill of Cumorah." And this is what that hill looks like. So that was in 1823. He's an 18-year-old, and he claims he gets this vision. So in 1827, he says, "Well, I'm supposed to find these golden plates." He digs up these golden plates, and he claims they were written in Reformed Egyptian. So he had to interpret that. And he used and that's where he translated the Book of Mormon. But he used what's called the Urim and the Thummim. And that's actually a reference in Exodus 28. And it was on the high priest's breastplate. You know, the high priest had a robe and they had a breastplate they wore. And two of the pieces on the breastplate was the Urim and the Thummim. And so Joseph Smith claimed he used those to do his translation in his head with a hat, special hat he had. So back then, the Urim and the Thummim were, some scholars think they were white and black stones that was on the priest's breastplate. So one would indicate, yes, this is God's will, and the black would indicate, no, it's not. So Joseph Smith claimed that he is a prophet, and the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. So that's how he came about it. Now, once his translation was complete, he had one further use for the golden plates. To assure the skeptics that the plates did indeed exist, he showed them to several trusted witnesses who signed statements affirming that they had beheld the plates. Now, in preparation for viewing the plates, the chosen witnesses prayed for several hours. After lengthy praying, one witness reported he saw only an empty box. So Joseph sent him out for additional prayer. And after which, the golden plates became fully visible to the witness. Well, later, all three of these witnesses became apostate to Mormonism. And conveniently, God took the golden plates back to heaven. So they don't exist for us. Conveniently, they were taken back. So later, it's kind of an emotion-based religion. Later in the 1840s, Smith established a new city in the Midwest called the Nauvoo, Illinois, where he served as mayor and militia commander. And in 1944, Smith and the city council angered non-Mormons by destroying a printing press that was used to be critical of Smith's power and his practice of polygamy, more than one wife. So during the incident, he destroyed that printing press. Well, during the ensuing turmoil, Smith was thrown in prison in Carthage, Illinois, and a mob stormed the jailhouse and killed him. So that's how he ended his life. 1844. 1844. Here's the temple in Salt Lake City. You know, that's where Utah is the real hub and the base for Mormon religion. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is another word for Mormon. It's a beautiful temple. The mountains in the background. Joseph Smith, you know, I don't. That's a good question. I don't know how did they start in Salt Lake City. I didn't look into that. If he was in Illinois, then you'd think it'd be in there, but maybe there was some other reason they moved it to Utah, or maybe that's where he was at the beginning. Oh, well, maybe if they were cast out and had to go west. The actual Book of Mormon. That's a picture of it. The actual book that he wrote. It's actually a grade B religious fantasy, is what this book is, and it has to do about the Jaredites and the Nephites, neither of which are mentioned in the Bible. But that's what the Book of Mormon talks about. It's a fantasy about these two groups of people. So one guy, Dr. Neil Judd, made a comment about it. He's an archaeologist. He said, neither representatives of the National Geographic Society, nor to my knowledge, archaeologists connected with any other institution or equal prestige have ever used the Book of Mormon in locating historic ruins in Middle America or elsewhere. And then the Smithsonian made a statement in 1979. They said, the Smithsonian Institution has never used the Book of Mormon in any way as a scientific guide. Smithsonian archaeologists see no connection between the archaeology of the New World and the subject matter of the book. And then they make a comment, you know, Joseph Smith claimed that it was in Reformed Egyptian on these golden plates, right? Smithsonian said nothing in the Western Hemisphere has been found that even remotely resembles Egyptian. So this officially Reformed Egyptian just doesn't exist. In chapter 8 of the Book of Mormon, it should be some type of hieroglyphics, yeah, at some level. That what he meant by reform, who knows? I mean, he was the only one who saw it, and he was the only one who interpreted it. In Mormon chapter 8, it said, "Don't demand to see the plates, or you'll be killed." And we already talked about those two statements. That's a good question. I did not look that up. How many followers are there of the Mormon religion? There are other books. The Joseph Smith translation, or inspired version. What this is the King James version with significant revisions and additions. Smith intended to restore what he described as many important points touching the salvation of men that have been taken from the Bible or lost before it was compiled, such as the Book of Abraham, visions of Moses and Enoch. It's not a literal translation from ancient documents. He reported that he was forced to study it out in his own mind as part of the revelatory process. So it's his opinion about what's missing in the Old Testament canon. He just took the King James and tweaked it. He also wrote the Book of Great Price, the Pearl of Great Price, which has selections of his translation, first-person narrative of his life, and it's also got articles of faith, which are the 13 fundamental doctrines of Mormonism. So a lot of their doctrinal stuff is in this book rather than the Book of Mormon. He also wrote the Doctrine and the Covenants. These are lectures talking about church doctrine, important revelations or covenants, as he described it. But these are available, if you're interested in looking into that. That's kind of interesting. What do they look? Yeah, do they look at all of it? Do they look at? That's a good question. There are differences when you compare what they teach in these three different books that I described, and you compare it to the Bible. There are differences. One is the Trinity. One from Joseph Smith's most famous sermon. Here's what he said. God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. I'm going to tell you how God came to be God. We have imagined and supposed that God was God from eternity. I will refute that idea and take away the veil so that you may see. He was once a man like us. Yea, that God himself, the Father of us all, dwelt on an earth the same as Jesus Christ himself did. So his view of the Trinity is quite different. In his own mind, yes, that's where he's coming from. Polytheism, which means more than one God. Here's a couple other quotes. The grand reason why the Gentiles and philosophers of his school persecuted Jesus Christ was because he had so many wives. There were Elizabeth and Mary and a host of others who followed him. And he taught that they were his wives, Jesus' wives. So Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are three separate gods. That's his view. Polygamy, which is more than one wife. Joseph Smith, as you could tell, he viewed that Jesus had all these wives. He claims that he had over 30 wives, some women less than 15 years old, and he took many other women as well. Now, interesting, in 1890, the Mormon Church had a new revelation that polygamy was no longer one of their teachings. So they took that away in 1890. Saying, no, we've had a new revelation. We don't teach that anymore. So you can remarry? Yeah, that's okay. Racism was a big issue. Here's some quotes from some of his books. Indians are dark, filthy, and loathsome. In the Book of Mormon, dark people are sinful. Dark skin is loathsome. Those who marry dark-skinned are cursed. Well, not surprisingly, in 1978, the Mormon Church had another new revelation and officially renounced these teachings. Baptism. There's teachings about baptism for the dead. They do baptize in the name of Jesus preached to the Nephites several hundred years BC. So even that teaching is twisted a little bit from what we believe the scriptures teach in the Bible. All right, let's move on. To let you know a little bit more about that teaching, Buddhism. With Buddha is, I'm not sure I could pronounce that, Siddhartha Gautama. He was actually a real guy who was born about 550 BC. So he lived at about the same time as Muhammad, the Muslim faith. He was born into a wealthy family. Buddhism kind of came as kind of a reaction against Hinduism. Hinduism is a very rigid, priestly system. So Buddhism was trying to get away from that rigidity. They create full truths, and here's what they are. This is their perspective on life. Suffering is not getting what one wants. If you don't get what you want, you're suffering. The cause of suffering is desire, which leads to rebirth. So the way to end suffering is to end desire. The way to end desire and suffering is the Eightfold Path. So this is their Eightfold Path to change. And what this will lead to eventually is enlightenment or nirvana, which is reincarnation. So their Eightfold Path is you have the right viewpoint, which are these noble truths. You take away suffering and desire, then you embrace right values, right speech, the right actions, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right meditation. So it's really based on dispassion rather than compassion. And what dispassion is, it's not influenced by strong feeling. You're not affected by personal or emotional involvement. So you take out the emotional part and all those strong desires you have, sensual desires, appetite, whatever. You're trying to remove yourself from being influenced from all that. And it's a lifelong journey. That's what it sounded like, yeah.
It's pretty simple. Like, where I grew up, there used to be monks, like, standing outside, like, somewhere. They would just be standing under, like, the heat. Because I used to live in California.
Okay.
And so it would be, like, 80, 90 degrees outside. They would stand, like, right underneath the sun, like, just with the collection plate, with their bare feet in their robes and stuff.
The monks that stand outside of shopping malls in California. Okay. Subject themselves to the heat and whatever discomfort they have to go through. Yeah. It's being able to learn how to bear up under that without feeling the need for comfort and I need to be cool. Okay.
Shade and water.
Comforts of life, yeah. They do have a pantheistic view, which is their universe, the whole universe or nature is identical with divinity. So you can argue that it's not really worshiping a divine being as much as a philosophy is more of their view. Now they do have scriptures, but if you want to see where are the Buddhists in the world, you can see it's in Southeast Asia. There's probably 500 million. And you can see in 400 BC, you see that light brown area. That's where they were concentrated, but now present day, it's expanded throughout the Southeast Asia region. This is where the majority of them are. A few in India and Sri Lanka, but the majority is in Southeast Asia. They do have scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, the Tripitaka. There's 3 baskets. These are 3 sets of supposedly original sayings, teachings, and philosophies of Buddha himself. But, they were passed down orally for probably 400 years before they were written down. They were written down about 100 BC. And so it's about 500 years after Buddha lived is when they were finally written down. There's a basket of discipline. These are rules of discipline, conduct for monks and nuns. Well, what the monks do, they would go to the basket of discipline. The basket of sutras There's thousands of sermons and discourses attributed to Buddha and a few of his disciples. So if you go back, it's kind of like the Gospels for us. Their basket of sutras would be, what did he really say? And then you have basket of special teachings, that's commentaries and analysis of the sutras. So sometimes there's disputes between commentaries, just like we have in the Bible. That led to different sects within Buddhism. So I had shown this on classes, showing where these scriptures line up to other ancient documents, and you can see the Buddha documents their scriptures about 860 years difference between the oldest copy that's available and when it was originally written, which is, there's a shorter interval there with the Buddhist documents than it is with some of the Old Testament. All right, let's talk briefly about Hinduism. It's pretty much a principal religion in India. That's where it's concentrated. Who in the world is following this worldview? It's in India. About 1 billion people follow that. It was originally animism, which is, it's not animals necessarily, but it's natural physical entities, including animals, plants, even inanimate objects like this desk, podium, can possess a spiritual essence or a soul. And polytheism is more than one God. So it kind of morphed from that into polytheism and pantheism, which is everything composes an all-encompassing God. So the universe or nature is identical with divinity. It is syncretistic, that's a tough one, which means combining different systems of belief. So Hinduism is not really a single religion. It's a whole bunch of thoughts and how to view life thrown together. Their worldview is the physical world is evil, but it's an illusion, and suffering is an illusion. I don't know how you explain that to somebody who's really suffering. The goal is to escape the cycle of karma and reincarnation. So that's their goal, and here's some of their gods. Ganesh, the god of wisdom and intellect. Krishna, incarnation. Rama, more of a warrior. And Lakshmi. So they have all different kinds of gods for different reasons. It's very big in idolatry. They offer idols. If you go over there, there's ceremonies where they take the idol to the beach. It's a very real. A lot of the things in the scriptures that talk about idolatry back in the day, it's very much alive in India. The Hindu scriptures are similar in that, as Buddha, there's Vedas poems. They're ritualistic and priestly. There's several of them. I'll list 4 of them here. Rig Veda, Sama Veda, and a couple others. Some of them are hymns about the Hindu gods. This Sama Veda is basic hymns recited at sacrifices. The next Veda there is how do you make sacrifices? And the last one is some knowledge that a sage named Athara wrote down. So those are kind of their scriptures, what they look at. There's other documents where they describe the relationship between these poems and the sacrificial ceremonies. Another one that it's more philosophical texts about the Hindu religion. Those exist. Those were written about 700 BC. Epics, mythic adventures of these Hindu gods. We showed several pictures of them. their stories of their adventures and what they did and didn't do. And then they have Puranas, which are more local deities that may be local to a village or an area of the country. And then Tantras are religious discussions or teachings. So they have a whole bunch of stuff that they can turn to learn about their ceremonies and what these mythical gods did. And here's how, these documents line up with other ancient manuscripts. There's a lot, the oldest copy we have is AD 1300, so that's about a 2,000-year difference. So they're not as, we don't have as close of a copy to the original as we do in other religions. The last one I wanted to cover today, it's a question, yeah. It didn't seem that way from what I found. No, it's more of a, that's why it's not really a single religion. It's more of a philosophy of different teachings. Yeah, where the Vedas came from, I mean, those are just, the Hindu monks from way back when, it wrote everything down. Well, it was kind of created in the, like it says here, the 12 to 1500 BC. So yes, in that regard, time-wise, it was. Well, Muhammad lived about 600 BC, about the same time as Buddha. That would be after Hinduism. But, as it says here, the original date that a lot of these Hindu poems were written down was 700 BC. Well, they didn't get to write down Muhammad or Buddha stuff until 400 or 500 AD. So they were written down a lot earlier than Buddha was. The last one I wanted to cover was Christian Science, and we'll wrap it up here. This one had a founder, Mary Baker Eddy, 1820s, 1910. So she would have been in her early 20s when Joseph Smith died, kind of in that time frame. Some of the things said about her: she was subject from infancy to convulsive attacks of a hysterical nature and had many nervous fits. So she had a lot of things that she was dealing with personally. Christian Science's headquarters right here in the United States, Boston, Massachusetts, has about 1 million people who follow this teaching. She was heavily influenced by a guy named Finis Quimby. And it shows his document here that he created. And what he says there at the bottom, you can't read it there, but that bottom quote from him says this: "It is to the sick and not to the well that this is written, to open their eyes so that they can see how they have been deceived." So Quimby taught that God is universal wisdom and intelligence. God is presence. God is a loving principle. The emphasis that he taught was on disease and spiritualism. Disease is an error created not by God, but by man. If you have no false beliefs, then you have no disease. So the cause of all so-called disease is mental. It's a mortal fear. It's a mistaken belief of conviction of the necessity and the power of ill health. So salvation is released from ignorance. So she, Mary Baker Eddy, really embraced this teaching and started preaching it quite a bit. And she wrote a book. We'll get into it in a second. She stated in the New York Sun in 1898, she challenged the world to disprove that she had healed a variety of serious illnesses, including cancer. So Dr. Charles Reed, who later became president of the American Medical Association, offered to present similar cases for her to heal, which she politely declined. And he said, if she, by her Christian Science, shall cure any one of them, I shall proclaim her omnipotence from the housetops. And if she can cure all or even half of them, I shall cheerfully crawl upon my hands and knees, and I may touch the hem of her walking dress. But she politely declined. In the 1990s, there was about 18 documented cases of children suffering preventable death because the parents refused to take them to a doctor, believing the Christian Science was going to heal them. They were convicted of child endangerment and even manslaughter. So there's zero scientific verification that this teaching really works. Here's their scriptures. You take the Bible and you have to interpret it through Mary Baker Edie's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. You have to properly interpret the Bible through her book. You cannot take the miracles, resurrection, and so forth literally. So what's the differences? You know, the way that she has interpreted the Bible. Here's a Christian Science Monitor. They have newsletters and websites that you could get all of that. They view Jesus differently. They view him as a mere human with a divine mind, an embodiment of the Christ principle, the highest possible inner consciousness. But he was just a mere human. Jesus did not die on the cross. That's her interpretation. I'm not sure how she gets that, but that's why you have to interpret the scriptures with her book. The Trinity is not what we Christianity typically views it. It's life, truth, and love, and there is no hell from their belief. So those are some of the differences, and obviously she teaches that you can overcome any disease by just following some of these teachings. You could cure anything, and about 1 million people believe it and live this way. I'm sorry? That's a good question. How does she deal with death? I don't know. I didn't look up that. That's a good question. Okay, that covers it for today. We are done.